Welcome to my basement, everybody. We've got a very special episode for you today, and we are highlighting all things Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, is hitting consoles and PC gaming systems everywhere, and it's an incredible game. Check out my review on the game if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how I feel about it. But I thought it would be an amazing opportunity to talk with the person that created Prince of Persia himself. Jordan Mechner is here with us today, and joining him is the editorial director at Digital Eclipse. His name is Chris Kohler. He's been on Vic's Basement before, and recently this duo collaborated on the making of Karateka. I'm choosing Karateka. I guess that's what came out of my. I know you say it a bunch of different ways, but that's how it came out. Jordan, let's start with you, my friend. How are you doing? And where in the world is Jordan Mechner?
I'm great, thanks. Great to see you. I'm actually in Montpellier, a small town in the south of France, and that is Montpellier behind me. It's the cathedral, and this is where The Lost Crown was developed. It's the home of a great team, and it's where I've been living for the last 7 years. I'm originally from New York.
Yeah, that's completely a mind trip for me. I've been to the Ubisoft Montpellier office before. It's an incredibly collaborative and creative space. I was there for the making of King Kong back in the day, and I just got, it was a really amazing escape because it's so removed, I think, from a lot of other developments in the world, although there's probably a nice bustling community of game developers out there. But it felt like this isolated oasis in game making. Is that what you've discovered while you've been living there?
I mean, Montpellier has a wonderful creative community. It's got a lot of universities. I mean, it's got Ubisoft, one of the biggest studios here. It's got a lot of smaller indie studios. Eric Chahi is here. There's others. And there's also a great graphic novel and comics author community. So this last 3 years, I've spent writing and drawing my first graphic novel. It's a new medium for me, although I've written scripts for graphic novels, collaborated with great artists. This is my first time writing and drawing. And so what's behind me is actually my rendition of Montpellier, my memoir Replay, which was just published here in France and is coming in English in March, tells the story of why I came to Montpellier, the video game project that brought me here. And it's also the story of the history of Prince of Persia and of Karateka making games from the 80s until now, as well as my family's story.
That's amazing. One of the things that I am so impressed about you is you're this groundbreaking game developer who really saw that video games could be about storytelling and very cinematic, and you use rotoscope technology to build the original Prince of Persia. But you're also I think a groundbreaker in terms of documenting all of this material and sort of doing these behind the scenes kinds of looks at how difficult it is to conceive of these things and actually see them come to fruition. And Chris, it must have been amazing to work with a person that had the foresight in the 80s to gather all of this material and keep shooting this material and writing the journals when you're working on a project like the making of Karateka. I mean, it must have been incredible to have that fount of information for you guys to play with.
Well, it was a dream project in that sense, right? Because I mean, Vic, you've played things like Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga collection. You've even seen things like Atari 50, the anniversary celebration, where we've had to do so much digging to find any little scrap of information that we possibly could about the making of these classic games, because a lot of times people would sit down at their computers and they'd just be staring at a blank screen, and they would create a video game and they would be done in a week or a month or something like that. And then they sort of emerge from their office or their bedroom or whatever it was, in a haze of marijuana smoke. And then there was a finished video game. And it's like, that's how these things were kind of created. There was no documentation. So Jordan was a very interesting creator in that. Well, first of all, I mean, I think that, and certainly he can speak for himself on a lot of this stuff, but, he was taking inspiration from so much of the world around him, and not just video games.
Right.
So, he really did sort of meticulously document the creation of everything, but it's great for us that, again, saved all the floppy disks. And of course, it's wonderful that Jason Scott, Tony Diaz, guys from the Internet Archive were able to come in and actually, actually take all those floppy disks and extract the information from them, which was crucial. And then, that Jordan he did so much of his designing on paper that, and then saved all of that, donated it all to the Strong Museum of Play. And so to start out this project and just have, and we still did more research and we still went out there and found more stuff, but just have it all was so important. And yeah, so in that sense, it was this, this wonderful, and also it's never going to happen again. Like I've had to resign myself to the fact that like there will never
there aren't a lot of other Jordan Mechners out there.
No.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, even with, with Prince of Persia, if you read Jordan's Prince of Persia journals, I think, and Jordan, again, you could really speak to this, but it's like once you got into Prince of Persia, you were really kind of you were firing on all cylinders at that point.
Right.
There wasn't as much of a, you don't really see like, I'm struggling with this and I'm struggling with that. And how am I going to do this? And how am I going to work on this aspect of the game? When you read the Prince of Persia journals, it's more like, I know what I'm doing and we're doing it and I'm at Broderbund and I'm making it happen.
Yeah, it's the difference between the angst of being 18 and the great maturity and perspective that comes with being 22.
Jordan, how did you define yourself back then? Because I know, you've got all of these artistic interests and potential directions, and you've chased a lot of these artistic endeavors over your life. I hazard to call it a career because you've had multiple careers at this point. How do you define yourself? Did you think of yourself as a game maker? It feels more like you're a holistic storyteller. Like you like to talk about things in a bunch of different medium.
I think storyteller is probably the common thread, between the different media, between making games, writing film screenplays, filmmaking, and now graphic novels. I mean, for me, programming games was a means to an end. It wasn't that I loved programming and then I started making games. It's like when the Apple II came along, I was 14 years old. And at that point, until then, my love had been animation and comics. I was writing and drawing my own comics. I love Disney animation. And if the Apple II hadn't come along when it did in 1977, I might have continued on that path. But the incredible thing about the Apple for me as a kid was that I could make a game and nobody would know that it was a kid who made it. So if I could do the animation and do everything well enough, it could be published along with, the real professional games and nobody would know. And so that was just incredibly enticing. And I learned to program and I figured out how to do the animation on the Apple basically because I wanted to tell a story. I wanted to make a little interactive animated movie, and that was Karateka and Prince of Persia. Really were games that were inspired by film as much as being inspired by other games.
Yeah, take us back to Prince of Persia. Was that something that you started with a title and then you built the game to it, or how did it come together? And why choose this ancient Persian kind of empire as your setting and your background?
I think it's one of those things that at the time it seemed like not even a decision. It's just like, yeah, that's good. In retrospect, I have to say that it's almost like destiny.
Yeah.
And one of the subjects of a replay of my graphic memoir is how many forces were kind of leading to that I wasn't even aware of. And some of them like go back through the generations to my family history, things that I didn't know or I thought I didn't know that I only became aware of when I sort of, looked into the archives and started to, work out the backstory. And I realized how much was pointing to, Persia and this 2,000-year-old storytelling tradition as the setting for this game. But at the time I was on the Apple II, I was just looking for a practical solution. It's like, okay, this is going to be a running, jumping game. I need something that I can render with the 280 by 192 graphics of the screen. Hey, what about Arabian Nights, Persia, Thief of Baghdad? At that time, I didn't even know that Persia was different from Thief of Baghdad. It was just sort of part of this collective unconscious fantasy of,
Yeah.
a world where there were palaces and princes and viziers and imprisoned princesses that you had to climb a wall and rescue. And I don't even know where I got it, from movies, certainly, from children's books of the Thousand and One Nights. But since then, over the years, my interest, my fascination with Persian culture has just gotten deeper and deeper. And there's just so much behind it now. And I think that's really, so key to the longevity of Prince of Persia and the fact that it spoke to so many people around the world. This combination of modern video game technology, modern, in 1979, with this ancient pool of archetypes and stories that it's really a treasure of world culture that we all kind of know without really knowing it.
Right. And I have to credit Prince of Persia and the series now, because it's become much more than just this, endeavor of a young man trying to like make his name. It has really grown into something, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But I think you can really credit Prince of Persia and some Assassin's Creed, which sort of came out of that, for us to kind of, through the prism of video games, to look into these histories and to this wealth and treasure of storytelling, and I don't know, all these incredible destinations. Chris, let's talk a little bit about what Prince of Persia meant for you, because I'm sure you were on the road to being someone that covered the video game industry when that game came out in the late 80s and the early 90s. What did you think of Prince of Persia when you first played it?
Well, I mean, certainly what I'm trying to think of. Well, first of all, what was the
where did you play it?
Platform that we played it on? It would have been the IBM PC. It would have been probably the IBM PC like VGA version, which was, I mean, it was lovely. And I mean, I think that as maybe a little like younger kids at the time, my brother and I were a little bit less patient with a game that would let you, play for a while and then, instantly die and then, you're dead, go all the way back to the beginning. And I think as an adult, it's a little bit more, I think you appreciate that a little bit more, that sort of like gradual building. It's almost like a roguelike in that sense.
It's a roguelike.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes,
it's the first Souls game.
Yeah. So we had played some of Prince of Persia 1. I don't think we ever, I think that, I definitely have memories of like, maybe even watching my brother play. I'm like, oh, he's like so much further than any of us have ever gotten, because he was on like level 3 or whatever it was, but I remember the rotoscoped animation, or really, not really having any clue at that time how it would have been made. But I remember the beauty of the animation of that game as being something so striking, and the way that the character jumped, like throwing his arms out in front of him and lunging with one leg to sort of jump across this platform. It was unlike any other video game character had ever jumped. And it was so striking and so memorable that in probably the year 2003, 2004, when G4's show, I think it was Icons, aired. And it was talking about Prince of Persia, and it was talking about Jordan. I think it was Icons, and it showed, and it, I saw for the first time ever the rotoscoping footage of Jordan's younger brother David in the whatever looked like a parking lot, jumping and doing the jump. And it just blew my, when I saw that footage of that jump for the first time, my jaw dropped, because that was the jump. And to see this iconic video game move, and to see the film that it came from, and to see it, this perfect one-to-one thing, to essentially look at it backwards, see the finished result and then where it came from, that absolutely left such an impression on me. And I had such a respect at that point for, that what had been done to achieve that. And of course, then, thinking back on it, it's like, oh, and that's why the prince jumped so much differently than every other video game character, because it was actually based on, it's not that Jordan was like cutting corners by saying, oh, I don't know how to do animation, so I'll just rotoscope it. It was like, no. It's, in doing that, it's like, how does an actual human being, how would they jump over a gap? And they'd throw their arms forward and they'd lunge forward in a way that was, totally natural and was not this sort of affected or totally artificial, video gamey animation. And so that process, really just created something that was so unique and so memorable. But I have to, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I'll kind of leave it here that the Prince of Persia game that truly grabbed me was Sands of Time.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. Yeah. It is amazing because when you look at some of that footage, it evokes black and white newsreel footage of Disney animators and how they kind of worked out their systems to make their animations look so real. And the presence of mind, Jordan, for this, you as a young person to recognize how this was going to emotionally connect with people, because I feel like that was the impetus. Like you really wanted to make us feel something, not just play it and have a good time. You wanted us to feel something. But for you to include your family, that must be, because I know your father worked with music on Karateka, and it must be amazing for you to see the threads of your history and your family in your work like that.
Yeah, both Karateka and Prince of Persia were really family projects. And as the making of Karateka shows, my dad didn't just compose the music. He was an important sounding board for me. And he actually put on a karate outfit and, climbed up onto our family car to climb the cliff at the beginning of the game. I rotoscoped my dad on Super 8 film, several years before I videotaped my brother David in our high school parking lot with the much improved brand new technology of VHS. And both times the challenge was how to get that footage into the computer.
Onto a computer, yeah.
I didn't realize that I was kind of reverse engineering or finding a digital equivalent to the rotoscope that had been invented in the 1920s by animators. I just knew that I wanted to get that sort of rawness and lifelike feeling and the imperfection also of what an actual human will do. The way my brother jumped, he's not an athlete. He's not a stuntman. He was 15 years old and didn't like sports really any more than I did. And so the way he jumped, it was charming. It gave the character a personality, and that comes through even when it's reduced to pixels. So there's something really magic about rotoscoping in that way. I knew what I wanted. I knew that I wanted the player to feel for the little character on the screen and bond with them, and actually and hands would start to sweat on the joystick because you don't want to fall. You don't want to fall on the spikes because you really feel like you don't want to hurt that guy. So I knew what I wanted. The question was just how to achieve it. And so the rotoscope was really born out as a technical solution, out of necessity.
Yeah, and I don't want to be reductive about games that are just purely about impulse and instinct and skills, and they're just fun. But I just played The Last of Us Part 2 remaster again for a review, and I was struck by the filmmaking know-how and the processes, because there's commentary in this remaster, and there's something applicable here. I can see that through line back to the work that you were doing in the 80s, thinking about games as this potentially filmic medium with beginning, middles, and ends to the plot. And the challenge is kind of being rooted in emotion, which I think is really incredible. I want to talk a little bit, though.
One of the points that we really wanted to make with the making of Karateka was that when you look at stuff like, The Last of Us 2, remastered, the absolute, state of the art in video game narrative, that if you start going backwards and you say, well, what inspired Neil Druckmann, and then what inspired him, and what inspired that person and that person and that person, eventually you're gonna get back to Karateka. And it's a game that not enough people have really heard about. And it's the point that we were trying to make, is that this sort of very, very foundational work that Jordan did on Karateka in creating that type of game that, of course, Prince of Persia was then the sort of the next evolution of that, creating that cinematic game, creating that game in which you feel something for the characters on the screen, doing that extensive use of cinematic scenes, paired with the animation, paired with his father, Francis Mechner, that, the really one of the first true soundtracks, the first true movie-like musical scores that was written for a video game.
Cheers to your dad too. Like, honestly, it's like, what a beautiful tribute to you and your passions to support you in that really fantastic way. You know, it's amazing.
Right. But
And
it's not that
I'm
this
so
game came
glad
out. It's not that this game came out and was forgotten. It's like this game really did have this major impact on a generation of designers who looked at Karateka and said, this is the power of video games. This is what we can do to tell stories. And I absolutely think that you see that pathway. And it's so important that we not forget that, is the point that I wanted to make.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about rotoscoping in video games, because the success of Karateka and or Karateka, it's like every time I come to the word, it's like, how the hell do I jump like
we
Prince
didn't
of
have the
Persia
internet
on?
then, so there was no way to standardize how we were supposed to pronounce things. We all just said it our own way.
Well, when you play Karateka, let's try it that way, and Prince of Persia, they're so influential as well. We start to see some other rotoscoping games. I remember Blackthorn and being so impressed by that, and Flashback and Another World. What was it like for you, Jordan, to kind of be? I don't know if I'm putting this title on you, but you kind of represent to me the father of rotoscoped video games, or rotoscoped animation in video games. What was it like for you to see other companies and other creators attempt that Prince of Persia style?
Well, I never felt proprietary about it. I didn't invent rotoscoping. I mean, Max Fleischer patented it in the 1920s, and I didn't even know that. For me, it was just the technique that I needed at that moment.
Yeah.
And I used rotoscoping again for The Last Express in the 90s, but in a different way, because that was a point and click adventure game with a realistic 3D depiction of a train, the Orient Express. And so I wanted a cast of characters that would be very specific, that would have human expressions, each their own way of moving, their own costumes. And so, we outfitted the characters with, crazy costumes with lines on them and makeup and wigs that were designed to come through clearly in the rotoscope. And, the goal was a kind of something like a liquid pen and ink type drawing, like the Art Nouveau style of Toulouse-Lautrec, which was appropriate for the period. But that was very different from the rotoscoping of Karateka and Prince of Persia, which were action games. So I think really every project is its own thing. And, the motion capture that's done today it's incredible, like technologically compared to what we were doing, in the 80s, but it's a tool also with its strengths and limitations, and poses new challenges. So I think it's just fascinating to see. We all knew that the medium was going to evolve. In the 80s, we sensed that we were at the beginning of something, that this was going to somehow be a new art form. But I don't think any of us could have imagined how fast it would happen. And how far
I think we're on the kind of the precipice of that, I think, with AI right now too, and how quickly it's being adopted and potentially corrupting all kinds of the world. Right? I want to talk to you guys a little bit about your thoughts on AI as an artistic tool. But so you were never threatened by any of these other rotoscope games, or you didn't look at them and think, they're riding my coattails or anything like that. It was just like, it just made sense for you.
Yeah, Prince of Persia was already riding the coattails of Lode Runner, Choplifter, Mario, and the first 10 minutes of Indiana Jones, the movie, as well as thousands of years of Persian storytelling. So I feel like we're all part of a continuum. We're inspired by the things that we experience and that we play and see, especially when we're young. And then we make something, and if we're lucky, the thing that we make is going to be enjoyed by people who are then going to take it and make it their own and do their own thing. So I just feel honored to be part of this parade.
That's amazing. And congrats again for a new Prince of Persia game out this week as we're recording this, which is just incredible. But let's talk about the pivot from, and I think motion capture is this kind of interesting line that you can trace back to rotoscoping. Rotoscoping in a way is almost like early days of motion capture in some ways. The idea you're capturing the motion of humans, and motion capture does that digitally, more sort of, computer first kind of thinking. But when we pivoted from 2D experiences to 3D, that was really, I think, a pivotal moment for people like Chris and myself, who were out there banging the drum for more discussion around video games as an art form and more celebration and more dissection. And we built careers as people that would cover the industry, I think largely on the back of this newfound awareness that video games had moved from this two-dimensional kind of thinking to this fully realized, real-time 3D exploration. And that's how I sold the TV show. I was just talking about this leap that we had made. But it was games like Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time that really kind of underlined the potential and where we were going with all of this. Talk to us a little bit about how Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time came together, and your now decades long relationship with Ubisoft. Do you still own the Prince of Persia brand, or does Ubisoft own it, or how does it all work with that?
Well, at this point, it's complicated because there have been all of the Ubisoft games. There's been the Disney movie, but certainly Prince of Persia is a Ubisoft franchise now, and as witnessed the Lost Crown, which was made right here in Montpellier. But in 2001, that was when Yves Guillemot of Ubisoft contacted me, and they had just acquired Broderbund's games portfolio. Broderbund had kind of imploded. And Prince of Persia was one of the titles that Ubisoft was very interested in relaunching, and they had a great team in Montreal, where they had a pretty new studio that wanted to do it. So, Yves proposed this. I went to Montreal. I met the team, and it was an interesting moment because you could say the first act of Prince of Persia, which was the original 2D game, which had its success in the early 90s on all kinds of consoles, followed by the Shadow and the Flame, the sequel, kind of fizzled out because, as you say, the industry went to 3D. And we had multiplayer shooters. I mean, that was what was exciting. And so to do to complete that Prince of Persia 2D trilogy just didn't excite anyone in 1993 the way it would have a couple of years earlier. So I did The Last Express instead. And then Broderbund, it's one of the last Broderbund games before the company went away, was Prince of Persia 3D, which was, I wasn't on the team for that, but I had seen Tomb Raider come out. And Tomb Raider, it was so impressive. That was the first 3D game with an animated Prince of Persia-like character, and you're watching, it's not a first-person shooter. You're seeing the character, jump and step on platforms and do all these things. So I looked at that and I was like, oh, it's so brilliant. That's Prince of Persia in 3D, with a great story and a female character. Okay, it's been done. There's no need to do that. And so the question with Prince of Persia 3D was always, how is this not going to just be, Tomb Raider with a guy with baggy pants and a sword? And Prince of Persia 3D, it's, and it was of its time. I know there's a lot of players who played it and enjoyed it. I personally actually didn't play it past the second level. It's just, I didn't even have a PC my PC would crash when I tried. And at that point, I was, I was going to film school. I was interested in screenwriting and filmmaking. That was just sort of a period when I had stepped away from video games. So when Ubisoft approached me in 2001 about making a new Prince of Persia, I was like, okay, well, is it going to be in 3D? Because I don't know, the last 3D one wasn't fun. So then going to Montreal, meeting the team, and they had done some very quick sort of exploratory animation tests showing how the animation could be vertical, with characters, pole vaulting and sort of Cirque du Soleil type action, not which didn't exactly match the final game, but it just blew my mind wide open. I was like, oh, okay, a 3D Prince of Persia, on this console where the action is vertical as well as horizontal, and you can chain moves together with fluidity the way you could in the old 2D Prince of Persia, not like winding up to take a step and then take another step. Like, yes. So I went to Montreal and worked with the team for 2 years, and that was really a wonderful experience.
So you actually moved to Montreal and lived in Montreal with the team?
I went back and forth between LA and Montreal for as long as possible, and then at a certain point just moved there.
Yeah.
be there full time. And it was, yeah, I mean, and it was sort of an underdog project. I mean, nobody was saying, okay, Prince of Persia is going to be a huge franchise. It was like, we've taken a game that was, not forgotten because it was appreciated as a classic, but to be a classic 12-year-old game in 2002 meant basically a game that nobody is playing, that you can't get anywhere. It's remembered, but it's not current. So we knew that the Sands of Time had to appeal to gamers who were too young to have played the original Prince of Persia. It had to stand on its own merits. And at the same time, there was this DNA that we wanted to capture and carry forward and pay homage to. And so elements like the hourglass, the theme of time, and of course, just the universe and the gameplay were, hopefully would feel like Prince of Persia, even though it was a different character and a different story. And
we were in full production during that time period, and so we would visit Ubisoft Montreal. I think we went a few times while they were making the game, and I profoundly remember. I think it's Raphael Lacoste talking about the art and the background elements of Prince of Persia weren't based on just like historical reference. They were based on like 19th century paintings that added a fantasy element inside of the paintings, and just the sort of presence and of mind and the wherewithal to think of the artistry in the environments through that kind of prism was just mind-blowing to me. It was like, oh my God, it's just layer upon layer of artistic kind of celebration and appreciation. And I could see it just shaping up. It ended up, I think, becoming our game of the year, won tons of game of the year awards. We gave it straight tens on our show. We were flipping out about it.
And Vic, I think that must be the first time that we met, isn't it?
We probably did, probably at Ubisoft Montreal. But there were subsequent sequels and stuff as well, which were good, but they never quite hit the magic of Sands of Time, at least from my perspective. How do you feel about, where Ubi took the franchise in retrospect? Because there were several other Prince of Persia games after Sands of Time, but to me, Sands of Time is kind of like this special magic moment in video game history.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly close to my heart. It's special in that that's the only one of the Ubisoft games of that generation that I worked on, that I was on the team. After Sands of Time, the core team with Patrice Desilets went on to develop what was going to be the Sands of Time sequel, next-gen sequel, originally Prince of Persia Assassin, but it evolved into Assassin's Creed. And so, of course, that team stayed with Assassin's Creed. I had meanwhile gone back to LA after shipping Sands of Time, and I pitched the movie to Jerry Bruckheimer and Disney. And so I wrote the screenplay for that. So I wasn't involved in The Warrior Within and The Two Thrones. I mean, I knew the team. They kept me in the loop of what they were doing. But of course, I don't have the same relationship for those sequels as I did for the Sands of Time, where it was just like we all poured our hearts into it.
There was something so special. I talked to Yuri Lowenthal like a year ago talking about the remake, which I'm still very hopeful for. I hope it turns out beautiful. I don't know if you're involved with that at all, but I can't wait.
I'm not on the team, although they've kept me in the loop. And Yuri, by the way, is still a friend. We were neighbors in Los Angeles for a long time. He's actually recorded the audiobook of my Making of Prince of Persia journals. So Yuri,
that's amazing.
It was a strange experience hearing Yuri reading what 20-year-old me had written, while I was making this game.
Well, Chris, I want talk to me about, because you were, I think, working at Wired and like you were deep into covering all of this stuff. Let me hear what your thoughts were on what Sands of Time meant. And I do want to talk a little bit about the Prince of Persia movie as well, and that unique position that you're in with that whole concept there, Jordan. But Chris, let's talk a little bit about Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and this new kind of era, this new reinvention of the brand and the property of Prince of Persia that Ubisoft was, bringing out to the world through the 2000s.
Yeah, so as Jordan says, it was never. I don't think there was any sense of like, oh man, Prince of Persia is back and it's going to be a huge franchise now. It's like it was more like, oh, right, Prince of Persia. Oh, they're making another. Oh, yeah, that's cool. I'll check this out. I played it on the GameCube. And I think I did get a review copy at that point. It was like 20 years ago now or more.
Yep, I know.
I think they asked, like, did you want this on a PlayStation or Xbox? And I'm like, GameCube. GameCube had the best controller. Everybody knew that. And so that's what I played Xbox. It on. And okay, I'm sorry to hear that you're sitting there with a controller trying to mess with that. Although I'll say now, if you want to play Sands of Time, I think the best way to do it is it's backward compatible on Xbox, and I have so much respect for what Xbox has done in terms of backward compatibility this generation.
Big time.
Literally some of those games, like original Xbox games, you can still play them on your Xbox Series X, and you can literally just go to the store like it was an Xbox Series X game, download it, play it. Looks really gorgeous. But I played it in the GameCube at the time, and had a blast, and really was like, I got it, very quickly of like, oh, like, this introduction of the Dagger of Time, of rewinding time. It essentially squares this circle of how do we do Prince of Persia style, you're in a room, there's spikes on the ground, there's traps, instant death is everywhere. How do we do that, but then also give you that chance to not literally have to go back to the beginning of the level, which, for modern players in 2003, players from 20 years ago, would be turned off by that. How do we do both of those things? And so, but still make it challenging, because of course there were times when you'd run out of the sand in your Dagger of Time. But then the storytelling, the fact that the prince and the princess would journey together and talk with each other and help each other out. I mean, there was a very early use of that. I think, Jordan, you'd said that you were inspired by Eco.
Eco, definitely. The sense of isolation and of going through this sort of haunting universe with one character whom you're trying to protect, and stay alive together. I mean, I think really Sands of Time it secretly belonged to two other genres other than action adventure. It was secretly kind of a survival horror zombie story.
Sure.
Because you're the only two humans left. The world's been destroyed. And everybody you meet is like a sand monster. And the other was Hollywood film noir of the 1940s, because the prince is telling the story in voiceover throughout the game. And I was actually thinking of movies like Double Indemnity or Sunset Boulevard, where the hero narrates the movie after he's already doomed. So it's basically, okay, I've been shot, I'm dying, and now I'm going to tell you how that happened. It all started back, but of course it's ancient Persia, so nobody thinks of, the hard-boiled detective movies, with a hat and the doorway in the shadows. But that was the structure, and that at the end you find out who the narrator has been telling the story to, under what circumstances and why, and that there's a surprise. It was kind of like we sort of built the whole game around that.
Yeah. And it's so much, and I think you sometimes you see a lot more of that in games maybe nowadays, but like at the time, completing that game and realizing that that whole story was structured so neatly and had been really considered so much more than I think even a lot of even as games had evolved, even by 2003, it was doing what I think the original Prince of Persia had done, and it was taking another leap, and it was driving video game storytelling forward. It's like, now that we have animation and characters, it's like, what can we actually do to take video game narratives and elevate it again? Right. And I think that's really, and also, I mean, but it all worked so neatly and so well, even down to when you died, and you'd hear the voiceover of Yuri as the prince saying, oh, no, it didn't happen that way. Hold on, and starting over again, everything from even the player's death, was integrated into this complete story. And it's so inspiring as a writer, to engage with something like that, because you see with what care everything has been kind of taken. It's not just sort of thrown together. It's like every little aspect of it has been really considered. And so it really deserved, I think, all of the the acclaim and success I think that followed. It was just a wonderful game.
It still does. I just posted a picture of the Xbox box of the game on Instagram, and I have dozens of comments of just adoration and love. And I was playing it a little bit in sort of preparation for this conversation today, and that was one of the things that stuck out for me was Yuri saying, "No, it didn't happen that way. Are you sure you want to quit?" And I just thought, why don't more games still do that? It's just so perfect. It just really interweaves this idea of a tale unfolding, and you're responsible for that thing. You keep it alive. Your play keeps it alive, and the game kind of. I think we see text pop-ups and things like that, but not this kind of response from the protagonist. It was just so intelligent, and it feels like that's the playground you got to work in with all of the team members in Montreal.
It was just a great gift to be able to do that, to have the freedom to try it. I mean, it was experimental, we didn't know if it would work. I mean, there was a question that we asked, like, is it going to be annoying for the player to hear this guy droning on in past tense while I'm trying to beat this level? Is it the fact that the story is being told in the past tense, but I'm trying to play it now? Is that going to make me feel like what I do doesn't matter because it was already in the past? And the correcting himself as like, okay, if I died, it means I told the story wrong. It wasn't like that. Like, we didn't know if it was. I thought it was going to work, but we had to actually do it, to be sure. And of course,
were you writing a lot of all of that, Jordan?
Oh yeah, I was the writer on the game. I wrote it all.
That's amazing. Well, let's talk about the success of Sands of Time and what that meant for Prince of Persia. But I think directly it leads into the movie happening with Jake Gyllenhaal, and I like that movie. I thought that movie was really fun, and I really dug that it was this moment for video games. And I think it's an overlooked moment because it wasn't the massive blockbuster success of Pirates of the Caribbean or something like that. But it was a really fun movie. And the fact that it came from this really important game series meant a lot to me. And I could see it up on screen, but I didn't write the thing. What was it like to write this movie, to take us back to the 20-something kid that's coming up with this whole concept and to see it on the big screen and visit the set of I mean, it must have been mind-blowing for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd been interested in movies and writing screenplays, for a long time. I almost didn't finish the first Prince of Persia because the screenplay that I wrote right out of college, my first screenplay, got optioned, and I thought I was going to become a working screenwriter, and like Prince of Persia was like, paused, 6 months in. It was only when that movie took a really long time to get made, and there were a lot of movies and studios started to pass, that I thought, I'd better go back up to San Rafael and finish this game. I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
So, I pitched Prince of Persia to with John August, who, by the way, was my screenwriting mentor and a great guy and a video game fan. He had played Karateka, and so I showed him the Sands of Time game that we had just done in 2003. He already knew Prince of Persia, and he's like, "Yeah, totally. I'll help you pitch this." And so Disney went for it, Jerry Bruckheimer. So I was the first screenwriter on the movie, but not the last, because
movies.
Bruckheimer, likes to have a lot of hands on his movies. And you mentioned Pirates of the Caribbean. So I had seen Pirates of the Caribbean in Montreal, like in a huge packed theater with the team of Sands of Time. We all loved it. We were, it's like, I mean, this is the kind of movie that Prince of Persia should be, just like a rollicking, old-fashioned, amazing Hollywood genre, pirate movie.
Yeah.
Just brought up to date and kind of made cool and sexy again. So that was basically the pitch. Let's do that for the 1001 Nights Thief of Baghdad type movie. And they went for it. The thing was that Pirates had been such a huge success. I mean, it was like every new movie in the franchise was like $1 billion box office success.
Yeah.
So they were planning for Prince of Persia to be that. And I just think that was just setting the expectations too high.
Yes.
It was at the time, the most ambitious, the most serious movie based on a video game yet.
Yep. Yep.
There had been Tomb Raider, which kind of set the bar before that. But with a director like Mike Newell, with the cast that they had, Ben Kingsley, Alfred Molina, and just the budget. I mean, it ballooned to like I think it was almost, they don't give out the numbers, but I think it was almost like $200 million that they spent on it. So it
Wow.
was a beautiful production. I mean, every aspect of it, the costumes, the scale, and to be able to visit the set and kind of look around at this incredible circus with like thousands of people and horses and a city that they'd built in the desert, and think all of this came from like pixels on an Apple II screen 20 years ago. Yeah,
That's amazing.
for a kid who loved movies, that was amazing. But I, in retrospect, and of course, any writer, any screenwriter will say, yeah, well, my draft was better. So I kind of still would like to see like the $70 million version of that movie with my script.
Sure. Sure.
And I kind of feel like that would have worked. I mean, it certainly had more of me in it. It wasn't the game, The Sands of Time. It was, I mean, the story of the movie that you saw pretty much matched the story of the script that I wrote, but every line of dialogue is different. So many of the details are different. So seeing the movie, this kind of funny double vision, like I can enjoy the movie for what it is, and it's pretty good. It could be better, but for what it is, it's a pretty, not bad summer action movie. And it's got, there's a lot of really nice things in it. And of course, like the best, some of the best crafts, talent in Hollywood, the music, the costumes, the armory, the horses, like all of it is
it
just
was
like
shiny as hell. I mean, it just looked like all the money went into it. I mean, that's what blew me away as a critic and a viewer and a fan of the game, and somebody that was in the media talking about all of this different media. Like that's always been my perspective on this, is that these game makers are fans of movie makers are fans of game makers. You all collect toys, you all have the same posters on your walls, and I just love that cross section, and I love the story of that merging of creative talents and interests and respect sort of crossing over. And when I saw Prince of Persia on screen, I felt that, I felt like there was just a lot of effort and love that went into building it. And I don't know if it was the movie for everyone. And maybe that's kind of the thing that undoes it a little bit, is that it attempts to be the movie for everyone. And maybe that shouldn't have been the case. It isn't based on a Disneyland ride where everyone goes to it. It's more than that.
I mean, it's a compromise, between so many things. And that sort of comes with the territory when you're doing a movie on that scale. There's so much pressure on it for it to be the blockbuster of the summer. And I thought, so how do you please the video game fan base, or what they imagine it to be?
Yep.
How do you please with a 4-quadrant audience that is people of all ages, families, adults, people who go on a date? Everybody has to want to see this movie, and then you have there's an ambitious Mike Newell and his crew, all mostly English. I mean, the film did studio work at Pinewood Studios in London after shooting on location in Morocco. And so they were very, you mentioned before what Raphael Lacoste had said about the Sands of Time being inspired by the 19th century European Orientalist paintings. So that's very much a European cultural orientation. In games, we call it the French touch. And of course, it's absolutely present in The Lost Crown, which I'm excited to talk more about in a minute. But there was a book of these Orientalist paintings that Jerry Bruckheimer sent to Mike Newell, and that's what got him excited about making the movie. It's not real. It's not the real Persia. It's this fantasy of Persia and the Thousand and One Nights filtered through this kind of 18th, 19th century European sensibility, kind of with this idea that the East is this exotic place, and it's it's double-edged. I mean, it's okay. It's the Hollywood version, but that was the tradition in which the filmmakers saw themselves. But at the same time, you have Jerry Bruckheimer, who's like, no, this movie's got to be like action. It's got to be sexy. It's got to make money. And ultimately, it tried to negotiate that all of those things at the same time. And it's it's not the same as like, an artist's or a small team's like, absolutely, this is our conception. It's simple, it's strong. We believe in it. Let's go for broke. And if we fail, we tried.
Jordan, I would love to see the movie that you have in your head around Prince of Persia get made. It would be amazing if a streamer like Netflix or somebody reached out to you and made that happen. That would be incredible.
It was also, the screenplay was also a moment of it, it was done like at that time in that context. And by the way, I've posted that screenplay on my website for free for anyone who wants to read it, who's curious to see the
Your website is incredible, my friend. I think Chris can back me up with this too. It's just like you don't see a creative person in the video game industry really go through their history. The eras of Jordan Mechner are all represented there. And the things you've been able to work on are so fascinating, and you're unique. Your whole sort of tack on all of it has just been from this unique position. And it's so impressive that you've pivoted to all of these different directions, writing comic books and illustrating your own comic books, and getting your journals made, and it's really fascinating. And I was blown away by your website, jordanmechner.com. I wish more people in the game industry honestly took that sort of perpetual documentation a lot more seriously. Especially now with technology being so accessible. Just taking the time to shoot things and to record things and to journalizing their life a little bit more, because all that is, man, and I think this, is inspiration for future creativity. Like somebody is going to go deep into the Jordan Mechner archives, and they're going to build us the next Prince of Persia. And I think that's what your work is all about at Digital Eclipse, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, and that's why. And the making of Karate is like, what a gift. Thank you, Chris, for having taken this mass of stuff, because basically I just took this stuff and stuck it in a folder. And so to pull it all out and kind of figure out the timeline and figure out like which journal entry corresponds to which floppy disk, to which build of the game. Like you've actually taken what would otherwise just be a bunch of stuff in boxes.
Dude, most people just stick them in boxes and we never see them ever again. Just the fact that you have that stuff and you can access it is just, I just got a thumbs up. Zoom's crazy for that. You put your, thumb, I was like, what the hell? What was that?
I was like, how did you do that? You're a superhero. Yeah. Well, and to be fair, like I never intended for anybody to see this stuff. Like the journal that I kept, I truly never thought I would even let my closest friends read that, let alone publish it as a book. So, but time will do that.
The space of, exactly. You sort of separate yourself out from who that person was, and you can look at it as more of a, and also, I mean, we all, and again, like I've done things where I've republished old work of my own, and there's always a preface that's just like, please, like, leave. This guy didn't know what he was doing, and he was kind of an asshole.
You should try having a TV show that exists from 1997 on the internet.
Oh yeah,
and
sure.
All the shit you're saying back.
Right.
People still come up to me like about the Smash Brothers review. It's like, I didn't get it, man. I didn't understand. Like, give me a break. That was 25 years ago.
Yes. But they can watch it on YouTube like it was yesterday. But so geez. I mean, well, first of all, before we go on, all the talk about the movie only just put me in mind of the fact that there was this big at WonderCon. I think it was WonderCon, when WonderCon was in the San Francisco. There was this big press push for the film, right prior to its release. And that's, I think I interviewed Jordan, but then also they had me interview Jake Gyllenhaal for that. And the funniest thing about it was I walked into the room where Jake Gyllenhaal was, and as I'm walking in, the first person that I encounter is Nicolas Cage, because there's a bunch of Lego Sands of Time, Prince of Persia Sands of Time Lego toys that they were showing off in this hotel suite, and Nicolas Cage was there doing something for a different film. And
Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Sorcerer's Apprentice, there we go. And I walk in, and I just walk in on this conversation between like the PR reps and Nicolas Cage, who is asking them to send some Prince of Persia Sands of Time Lego toys to him so he can build them with his kid. And I'm like, that's a really weird thing to walk in on. So that was a really interesting WonderCon. That's true. Yeah. Sorcerer's Apprentice. But yeah, so I mean, look, this just again, like this dream project, it really aligned with what I've always loved doing. I mean, I had this 25-year career in the media, and I always loved talking with developers, especially about their older projects, trying to tease out more details about the history of them, and just this growing sense that this is a medium in which, I mean, I think we can say that is just treated as disposable by the industry that creates this stuff. And as soon as a game comes out, it's forgotten about and things are thrown away and source code is lost. The stories are lost.
Why is that, Chris? Is it all economic, or is it just that the technology just moves so quickly, or a combination of it all? Like, why do you think it is treated like that?
I think for a long time, and I think that, 20 years ago or more than 20 years ago, I got into so many conversations with people in which I would try to essentially convince them that video games were an art form that we should be taking as seriously as other art forms. And even people who you'd think would get on board with this did not seem to want to take video games, truly take them seriously, and, really just sort of considered them disposable entertainment. And it was like, well, I mean, it's this is not something we shouldn't be looking at Super Mario Brothers and talking about, its storytelling techniques. But, it was profoundly affecting a generation, and it was becoming one of the most powerful storytelling mediums, even if a creator didn't go as far as Jordan did to integrate that kind of human interest by, having lifelike animations and story and soundtrack and everything. Even something where the developer wasn't thinking about that, you would see people who got so emotionally invested into video game stories. And I think that element of interactivity and control and that direct connection between you and the protagonist of the story is actually a very powerful thing.
It's primal, man. Honestly, when I was putting the pitches together around the show, I would think back to the 80s and playing games on the Atari systems and Coleco and all that. And even if the primal expression of emotion was anger because your character died or your ship blew up or whatever, there was something profound that I recognized in that. And I would just look around my living room because I had all the games back then and I'd have friends over all the time. And I would see it on the faces of the people. And that was exactly what I poured into the pitch document around EP. It's like, no, this isn't just a toy. It's not just a piece of technology. It is an emotional connection, even if they're just squares on the screen. You're emotionally in on that for some reason. I can't tell you why. It just is that way. And Jordan recognized that it could be so much more.
And as the years went by, I think more and more people started, understanding, that we were dealing with an art form. And I think that the sense that we should be documenting this, we should be preserving this kind of stuff started to grow. But then still you have people who are just like, this is just so much stuff, so that's when the Strong Museum kind of came in and became a repository for so much of the physical materials, you know what I mean?
Yes.
That was helpful when as they built out their expansions. But having the stuff is one thing, but then you have to tell the story with the stuff. And so to start looking at, again, to start looking at Jordan's stuff and, as essentially what my job has been for so long is, the job of a journalist, is, you have all of these scattered facts, and trying to find in the messiness of real life, where is the story that is taking place here, and how do I arrange these facts to show people, what the sort of A to B, what the through line is of all of this, And especially when you're talking with video game developers and trying to write the story of how did a game come together? How did this happen? How did that happen? And so when I start looking at all of this stuff and realizing that I can kind of triangulate a lot of this stuff from Jordan's floppy disks and documents and journal and everything like that, the fact that everything kind of matched up, the second that I started making some of those connections, it got very addictive, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is coming together in such a wonderful way. And it's so exciting to be able to do it, that it was really, truly just like this passion project of wanting to nail it and wanting to make all the connections that I possibly could. And again, thank you, Jordan, and really the rest of your family for all of the for the support and letting us tell this chunk of your story in that way, because there's other thing, you've got Replay coming out, which is a really, I mean, Replay is a tremendous work. I mean, I got certainly there's some subject matter similarities between Replay and the graphic novel Mouse. But even just sort of beyond the superficial sort of subject matter similarities, like there really is a great deal, I think similar in the sort of meticulous telling of this family story in that way, and like wanting to document that and wanting to get that down and really bringing it to life in a way that I'm very excited for. The sort of, it's already available in French, but the English speaking world is going to get their hands on it really soon. And I mean, I can't stress enough, like really go out and read this. And I'm not sure what the point is that I was trying to make, but all of that.
Well, I'll tell you what the point is.
Preservation of the past, of telling our stories, and I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Replay, because I think with me, why did I start keeping a journal when I was 17 years old? Why did I keep the journals? And when I finished a game, why did I take all my sketches and stuff that I didn't need anymore, and instead of trashing them, just stick them in a folder and stick the folder in a box and put the box in a closet? I think that impulse, that reflex, is something that came from the family, that was passed down unconsciously. I mean, I wasn't aware of it at the time. It was really only in writing and drawing Replay that I made the connection that my grandfather, who was, he was a soldier in World War I on the losing side. He was a refugee who fled Austria in World War II to Cuba and then to New York. He was a doctor, and when he retired, he spent 3 years of his retirement writing a memoir. It was like 1,000-page family story. And all of the letters he'd received, photos he'd kept, photo albums, postcards, even the letter he got from the Nazi government of Austria telling him that as a Jewish doctor, he had to give up his practice and give it to an Aryan physician. He kept that letter and included it. So this 1,000-page, memoir landed in our house, when I was 14 years old. I'd just gotten my first Apple II, and I was trying to learn how to program. So I wasn't thinking so much about the past. I was more excited about the future. But I think there's something about that desire to record what we know, to tell our story, because if we don't, it will disappear. And I think, like, in our family and families, who escaped Europe in that period, so much was lost and so many stories did disappear. I thought it feels like an obligation, just whatever it is that we know, that we've lived, to preserve it and pass it down.
Well, your creativity speaks to that too. Like the projects that you built, Jordan, are all these reflections of the past as well, and the importance of storytelling through remembrance and through appreciating the things that came before. And I think you've had this very unique and special kind of viewpoint on the world that has, made your projects incredibly exciting, but you as a person, as a creative individual, also incredibly inspiring. And I'm wondering, when you were a kid in the 80s and you're learning all of this stuff, were there outlets for you to tap into? Were there inspiring, I'm sure lots of inspiring work, but did you see anything familiar? Did you see anything similar to that? Any other creators that were also journaling their progress and that you could kind of read and dive into and be inspired by?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was voracious, as a kid, comics, movies, animated movies, and then games when they came along. I absorbed it all, but I also wanted to find out who made them and how they were made. Right. And that was really hard to find out. There was no internet. Like, it wasn't like, when a movie came out, there wasn't like a PR campaign to, hey, meet the creators, read the screenplay. Like, you couldn't find
Starlog magazine, man.
And I subscribed to Starlog and
it was great.
I read everything. I would even, I couldn't subscribe to Billboard magazine, because it was too expensive. But I would go to the newsstands, like in New York, and I would stand there and read each issue until the news vendor kicked me out and said, "Kid, you can't just stand here and read that." But I would try to read it every day to find out, what movies were getting made, what was going to happen. So there were a few people who published their memoirs or their journals. I remember reading Coppola's, actually Eleanor Coppola's diary of the making of Apocalypse Now.
Wow.
Which I don't think it stayed in print very long, but got a hold of a copy, and that was fascinating. There were a few movies that had the screenplay printed, published. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was one by William Goldman,
Mm-hmm.
great screenwriter who also wrote a book about screenwriting. There were so few books like that. Every one that I could find, I would read. Steven Soderbergh published his diaries of the making of Sex, Lies, and Videotape in the early 80s, about the time that I was, writing screenplays and wanting to become, a screenwriter. So all of those were really valuable to me, and as well as memoirs, autobiographies. Akira Kurosawa, Jean Renoir, Louis Buñuel wrote great memoirs. So I just read them all. It was just the only information I could get. And for games, what we had was Soft Talk, a short-lived but so important magazine that Al Tomervik and Margot Comstock started. And that was the only magazine that I could read and find out who were the people who made these games, who were the names on the screens. That's why I sent Karateka to Broderbund, because I'd read the profile of Broderbund software.
Wow.
Doug and Gary and Kathy Carlston, that made them sound like just the greatest, most decent human beings on the planet. And I was like, yeah, that's where I want to go. When I'm done with college, that's where I want to publish my games.
I love it.
Soft Talk had the top 30, so we could sort of track which games were bestsellers. That was my ambition, to crack that, to grow up and crack that Soft Talk top 30 list.
That's awesome. Hey, listen, in 2008, there was another Prince of Persia game, and Ubisoft, I think, kind of went in the Prince of Persia movie direction by trying to build a game for everybody. And I remember liking the game and appreciating a lot about it, but it certainly, to me as a player, didn't feel like Sands of Time. It didn't feel like what the Prince of Persia property evoked for me. And I'm curious how it felt for you to play that game. And I'm not asking you to slam it or whatever. I'm curious from your perspective there, Jordan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was on the sidelines watching that project evolve. Ben Mattis, the producer at Ubisoft Montreal, was great. And there were so many so much great talent on that team, and great aspirations. I mean, it was a young team too. Like they made mistakes on the way that they learned from, which is natural. There's so much that's great about that game, and so much that they achieved, and that the 2008 Prince of Persia has its own fans. I mean, when I meet people
love it.
Everybody's got their favorite Prince of Persia. For some, it's the 2D. For some, it's the Sands of Time trilogy. For some, Warrior Within is like the high point. But the 2008 just has its really dedicated fan base, and it just like the movie, it just didn't quite hit the bar that they would stay with that and then make that a series and keep doing more like that. It worked in so many ways, but it didn't catch fire 100% on all cylinders.
Yeah, I feel like if you had any perspective on where it came from, you could see that, and I think that, I don't know, did you feel the same way, Chris, when that one came out?
The 2008 one.
That's Nolan North as the Prince, and I love Nolan. He's amazing. But when I reviewed it, it was like, well, this is the Prince of Southern California. This just does not feel like Prince of Persia to me right now.
I did play it. It's been quite a long time since I played it, but I mean that's the one where you couldn't die, right? I mean that's the one where it just sort of rebooted as Prince of Persia. Yeah,
Which seems antithetical to the whole concept of Prince of Persia.
Well, I mean, I think it was sort of taking the idea of the Dagger of Time and maybe taking it, perhaps a little bit too far, because ultimately it's like you do, I'm always, on the inside of game development now, I'm always the one sort of like pounding the table about like, we have to, be accessible to all types of players.
Everybody,
That's why when you're playing like Karateka Remastered, in the making of Karateka, like there is an option to give yourself more lives if you want to do that, because I want everybody to be able to see all of the commentary and all of the little pieces. And, if you're restricting somebody to that one life, you're sort of blocking off a big chunk of players essentially from ever being able to see that. So I totally get the thought process behind that. But I think the solution that they came up with to get beyond that, and again, it's one of those things where, especially in in the Xbox 360 era, you started having telemetry, right? Because the Xbox 360 was the first console that was constantly connected online, which means that for the first time, game developers, for the first time really on consoles especially, game developers could now see the analytics and exactly what players were doing. And they were finding out crazy things. I mean, the things that I would start hearing was like, did you know, not for Prince of Persia, but like there was a certain game, was that I very big game that I knew a developer on who was like, 90x% of the players played through this entire game using just the standard weapon and never changed, off of the standard weapon. Or like, 95% of players didn't get past level 2, on this game or that game, because they start learning these things. And so I think that we were in that era where that telemetry kind of started affecting things. It was like, oh no one is playing. We have game developers who are spending, years of their life working on, a game with, 10 levels, and 90% of people are playing levels 1 and 2. And there's all this game that like literally nobody is playing. How do we get them to see all of the content? And so I think there has been a lot of thought about that now, but now I think you just have maybe a lot more nuanced decisions that are happening about how do we get people to move further? How do we, like, if a player is starting to struggle in an area, how do we make that area a little bit easier for the player, but importantly, without the player knowing that we're doing that? Because what you will do is you will cause a player to become agitated or irritated if the game, because we also, this is also the era where we saw you die 3 times and the game would be, looks like you're not very good at this game. And you're inadequate as a person. You want us to put the game on baby mode for you? Press X if you want the game to be on little baby mode for babies. So like, but the thing is that games still do that, but it's it's all secret now because, so essentially now, so I mean, again, so that like that solution to it was too obvious. It was too obvious because they're like, oh, don't worry, you just can't die. And like that removes, I think, a lot of those stakes. And so it was a really, really interesting experiment. And it was like the only time they ever did like not only like the Prince of Persia team, but I think a lot of people,
a lot of developers learned from that
learned from that. It was very interesting. Yeah.
Well, all of that is to say that The Lost Crown feels like a miracle. And I don't, have you guys had time? Chris, I don't think you've had time.
I'm playing it right now. And in fact, talking about these past games and the balance challenge is just making me just think of just how well the Montpellier team has nailed it with The Lost Crown. It's just so much fun. There's a sense of control, and yet of like you're always just at the edge of not quite knowing what you're supposed to do and what's going on, but then somehow you find it, and it's just so satisfying when you do.
I mean, this Metroidvania take is such a perfect fit. It's hand in glove with the whole, what I remember from Sands of Time and the original Prince of Persia games. It just feels like this, not necessarily an evolution of it, but just this perfect iteration on it. Like it's a great combination. I love the homages to the Sands of Time, but I also love it's diehard Metroidvania. It feels analogous and very much in the vein of Metroid Dread, which is one of my favorite Nintendo Switch games. Like they just sit side by side. They're so fantastic. Were you a little bit nervous about that as a direction for Prince of Persia, or did you like that idea right from the beginning there?
I've never been a Metroidvania player. I can't say that I've played any Metroidvania game deeply. So like, I mean, the team knew exactly what it was and what they wanted to do. I mean, 2D, of course, is like a really smart way to acknowledge the origins of the series while also bringing in everything that people loved and remember about Sands of Time and so forth. So really, as a gamer, it's like my worry was just that it would be too hard. I'm not a hardcore gamer. And combat is something that I've never been good at. Originally, I didn't even want there to be combat in Prince of Persia. It was my friend Tony who convinced me. It's like, no, just avoiding traps is not fun enough on its own. You have to add sword fighting. So, my worry was just that like learning all of these different moves and abilities and combos would just be too much for me, and I wouldn't be able to finish the game. I'd have to, give the controller to someone else so I could watch them finish. But I'm actually totally hooked. I'm so proud of I mean, you would laugh condescendingly if you saw me actually play, but I'm so proud of my combat abilities at Sargon now and how far I've gotten and the combos that I can do. Of course, then when I go on YouTube and I see like the amazing things that other players are already doing, I think the game officially releases tomorrow, right? So everyone's just nobody at this point has been playing the game for more than 48 hours, but the things that they do, this performance is just virtuoso, and I'm like, wow, that's there's just so much freedom to to play and to fight your way and to explore in the direction that you want. It's I'm really really enjoying it. It's so much. I hate to say it's more fun than I thought it would be because I thought it was going to be good, but it even surpasses that.
That's great. Chris, have you had a chance to play it yet? I know that developers hardly ever have time to play games.
No, and and I'm not a journalist anymore either. So, again, like there was this time in my life that was, from probably around the year like 1999 to the year 2020, in which they just sent me every video game for free like 2 weeks before it came out. So I got to play everything, before. But the other thing is, it's interesting being on the other side of that because I would be playing things before there was any discourse about them whatsoever in terms of like people had not set any expectations at all. And so it is very exciting. It's exciting to be like anticipating like, oh yeah, it comes out tomorrow. I'm going to get my physical copy in the mail tomorrow. Like it's exciting to be anticipating something that has gotten, such tremendous reviews, be really excited about something. And, 2D Metroidvanias. I love 2D Metroidvanias, so I'm very excited. And again, what I think is wonderful is that we've gotten to this point now where I think there was this time period in which if your game was going to be taken seriously as a big AAA release, it had to be in 3D, and it had to be in 3D, and you couldn't be confined to a 2D axis because that was like, oh, that was an Xbox Live Arcade game. That was not a real video game. That was like a throwback thing. But now that we can finally look and say, yeah, we can do what we can put out a big Prince of Persia release, and the character can be locked to a 2D plane. That ultimately, that is what makes the most sense for that. It seems to be a very good match of the concept and the genre here. So I'm really looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Oh, it is so wonderful. I want to talk. I know we're running long here, but I do want to talk a little bit about because now it feels like the artistry is finding that balance with this data and the analytics. And I feel like AI has always been a big part of video games, but it will become an increasingly bigger part. But before that, I just want to ask Jordan about working and living in Montpellier, and the game is being made down the street. Did you make that happen? Like, how is that real? How are you living in Montpellier at the same time as this excellent new Prince of Persia game is made out of Montpellier?
Yeah, well, it's more than a coincidence. I came to Montpellier to make a Prince of Persia game, which ended up getting canceled and never shipping. And that story is told in Replay.
Okay.
So that ended. But there has been desire, like within Ubisoft and among different teams, to do a Prince of Persia game pretty much constantly. And it's been a long time since the last one. So many of the people on the Lost Crown team are people that I worked with, on that canceled Prince of Persia project, but also whom I had worked with before on other things, whom I've known for many years. I mean, it's an incredibly deep and talented studio, for
such a deep bench.
Fairly small town. Yeah.
Many good people.
Yeah, and we talked about the artistry. I mean, even on the Sands of Time in Montreal, there were some people who had, come from France to work on the project, and their contribution, was essential. So just the long history of, of making Prince of Persia games, of appreciating Prince of Persia, and also just the cultural background, that there's just so much waiting to be brought to a Prince of Persia game. And so the Lost Crown was, really was able to draw from, people who had worked on past iterations, people that I had worked with before, others who were coming from other projects, and also the research that we did for previous Prince of Persia games, which never made it into any game, but some fascinating directions that we explored. So that doing the Lost Crown, the team kind of had all that as a starting point, and they looked at it and said, okay, so what are we going to take? What fits? What makes sense? And one of the things that I appreciate so much and it's always important to me as a gamer, is just the universe, the graphic look, the music, and the feeling of it. Because the gameplay can be brilliant, but if something about it turns me off, I'm just like, nah, I just don't want to spend 20 hours in this universe. I'll go do something else. But the Lost Crown really drew me in. It's the style is so appealing to me. It evokes Persia more than any Prince of Persia game of the past, and that includes the Sands of Time. Of course, we looked at Persian culture, but also at the, as Raphael told you, the 19th century Orientalist art. And the Lost Crown is different. It really went back to the roots of Persian culture and mythology in many ways. The music is Persian, and you can play the game in Persian. I mean, that's how I've been playing it.
I mean, I love this whole sort of cultural sensitivity kind of attitude that is pervasive around the art that we're consuming these days. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's more than sensitivity. It's really tapping into something that's very deep and rich, that brings something exciting.
Exactly.
That modern audiences don't know, because I'm playing the Lost Crown, and I'm seeing the Simurgh and hearing my combat instructor explained to me about Achka, and I get shivers. I'm like, this is something that's thousands of years old that I've read about, but I've never seen it like brought together in like a modern, appealing, fun kind of framework like this. It draws on anime, it draws on a lot of different traditions, but it just fits together so well. So I think the team has made really smart choices. And I've been they've shown me like at stages sort of where they were. And obviously I've been rooting for them and for this project, but it's just, so satisfying to see it the way it's all come together. I'm so proud of what this team has done.
It's an amazing game. I hope it's a blockbuster. That was going to be my question. It was like, how did you not, because I know you didn't work on this like firsthand or on a regular basis. How did you not go in and play it and check in on it all the time? And how did they keep it from you, especially if you're in the same city like that? But it sounds like you did do a little bit of that, but there's still a lot of fresh stuff for you too.
Well, I mean, they know exactly what they were doing. I mean, and they're friends, I know what they're capable of. Like it wouldn't have been interesting for me or for them for me to come in every now and then and say, oh, why don't you do more like this? That's like, it's like either you're there every day and you're part of the team or you're not. And anyway, I had my own full-time projects while the team was making The Lost Crown. I was writing and drawing replay. And after the project that I had just come off of, doing a graphic novel, was just the perfect thing. And it was also, a way to bring together.
That was the Prince of Persia project that didn't happen. Then you went to the graphic novel.
Yeah. I'd just been working for several years on a canceled AAA project. So starting another video game right away, it just wasn't the right moment. Like all my life, I sort of alternated between video games and movies or graphic novels, big projects, small projects. After the Persia movie, which was a cast of thousands, I ended up being just, one of the screenwriters. But the thing on the screen, I mean, it was wonderful, but it wasn't exactly what I had written. After that, I did
that sense of authorship.
Was my first graphic novel, which was I worked with, a couple, a team of two artists, husband and wife. It was the three of us. It's 480 pages, and we did it exactly the way we wanted. So that's like the opposite of a Hollywood, summer movie. So so after the canceled Prince of Persia project, writing and drawing replay was the right thing for me. And when the team came together to do The Lost Crown, I was like, yes, great, all power to them. And it's I think it's worked out perfectly for all concerned and for players as well, who now get to play The Lost Crown, including me.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I can't wait for the Sands of Time remake. Let's talk a little bit about the Prince of Persia as a property and the ownership. Like, I'm a little I'm in the dark. Do you own it still, or does Ubisoft own it, or do you how does it work in terms of copyright and ownership?
The best answer I can give is it's complicated.
Yeah.
But all Prince of Persia games are going to be Ubisoft. I think that's a simple answer for gamers.
Okay. So the game's Ubisoft, but you have creative freedom and license to build other things around Prince of Persia.
Well, there's also Disney.
Ah.
So
He
in
said
fact,
it was complicated.
yeah,
It
yeah.
is
And
short answer,
and maybe
complicated.
not so interesting. I mean, I think what gamers need to know is that, they've got the games to play, and then for myself, like my own creative involvement with Prince of Persia, I think is best expressed through my art at this point, through the the drawings that I've done through replay, and telling the sort of the story behind the story. I think it's really perfect the way it's landed.
Yeah, big time. And the road is long, and who knows where all of this leads, right? I mean, I would not be shocked to see that we get a Jordan Mechner scripted Prince of Persia movie on a. I mean, I think that's something that should happen, absolutely. And sequels to Lost Crown, but then also Prince of Persia we know can work in 3D, and some new AAA 3D Prince of Persia games would be incredible as well.
And we
more
know that
comics.
time doesn't flow in just one direction.
That is true. We do know that. We've learned that from some great games. Okay, I don't want this to be a downer, but I am fascinated by what's happening around authorship, and I think it relates to everything that we've been talking here, and what artificial intelligence is doing, and our sort of machine learning and analytics and all of this sort of data driven, because you created Prince of Persia for you. With all of the things that you knew, but you created it based. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like there was a sense of ownership on this concept, and you hoped that the world would like it. And I don't. Our games, can they be made like that anymore? Why don't we start with you, Chris? And is AI? Like, I'm talking about new ideas and new games. Is it all about to be radically different from the way that we know and love this medium?
I don't know. I was reading a book on my Kindle the other day, and every time Kindle shows ads, right, for like other stuff you might like, and you put it to sleep and you wake it up, and I all yesterday I was being fed ads for AI generated like children's books, which are clearly just like AI generated image, AI generated book. I went and looked on Amazon, author that doesn't exist, book that doesn't exist. Pay $1.99 for this weird thing. For this monstrosity. And I hope that ends soon. I think certainly there are going to be, AI is everybody has been using, I used machine learning, in Photoshop, at some point to, clean up a scan or a scan of a box or something like that, right? We're using content aware fill,
we're using it right now with your
like,
two backgrounds.
Sure, right,
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, the sort of overblown, like, we are going to have AI, write the entire script for this video game or write an entire book. I as a again, as both a reader, a consumer of things, I am watching films ultimately to feel a connection with the director and with the story that they're trying to get across to me, a fellow human. I'm reading books for the same reason. I'm not simply just sitting around trying to absorb whatever content is thrown at me by a machine. I feel like that's an incredibly bleak future. I think that we will certainly see AI integrated, but in a way that helps human artists essentially deal with certain aspects of their work. But the sort of the belief now that human creativity is going to be replaced by robots. I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying that if it does happen, it is a dystopia that we should be sad of approaching.
Do you think there's correlation with the way that so much, we talked a little bit about this, but so much development transitioned to analytics and data driven? I mean, I think the artistry in the medium was to find a way to use that data and to, throw art back at the player, and hide that it was being, led by these numbers and these analytics. And now it feels we're on the precipice of it being like in real time manipulation. Like it could be really weird.
Data is data, and it's all about how you use it and how you interact with it. Coming up again on the idea of that Jordan talked about, in the movie business, that pervasive sense of, well, is this hitting the four quadrants? Is this hitting the four quadrants? What about, and it's like, if you make a movie that would resonate with female audiences, thank goodness, it's like, were they, how hard were they hammering the four quadrants idea on a huge breakout hit like Barbie, which if you're trying to hit the four quadrants would simply never have been made. You can't, you can take that data and you can look at that data, but then the smart thing to do is to realize when you need to, you don't just make everything for that data. I mean, that's how you get, lowest common denominator stuff, is if you're just looking at, it's like, yes, it is a common denominator across all people, but you're not going to make something that breaks out.
Right.
But Chris, I think you said something very important, that the reason that entertainment appeals to you and interests you is because it was made by somebody.
Yeah.
And it's when we look at a painting or play a video game or see a movie, it's because for a moment we're experiencing the world through the eyes, through the brain of the people who created it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you take that away and you say, well, no, take a painting, whatever, a painting by Van Gogh, and we just treat this as an image. Is an AI capable of creating a painting that will be that will look enough like an undiscovered Van Gogh that everybody would believe that it is, and that we would like it, a focus group would like it just as much as the actual Van Goghs? Maybe that's possible. Would that have any interest? Not for me. I think it's, the thing that's interesting to me about Barbie is that it was made by Greta Gerwig, and I love her movies. I've seen them all. So that, that collision between how do you make a four quadrant, blockbuster for Mattel and be Greta Gerwig and still do your own thing, is interesting to see that worked out. Whether you like the movie or not, it's like, to me, that's what interests me. And
what's funny about that movie?
Member of the Writers Guild, the Screenwriters Guild, and we just went through a long strike. The actors as well, just to try to ensure that writing movies and acting in movies were jobs that could continue to be done by people who could earn their living doing that and reach an audience that way. And so, we fought to try to make sure that would stay the case for the next generation. And, by most counts, it was a qualified victory. That, the issue is still there. How is this technology going to be used and by whom? We can speculate, but of course, we would wish that it would be a tool that would be used along with all the other tools we've developed so far by creators, with good intentions to try to achieve, something greater. But
there, again, like, there's so many, I think there's a lot of people that want to be idea people. And I think the AI really appeals to idea people, right? The sort of person who is like, I came up with a great idea. That's 90% of the work. Here, why don't you write it, and we'll split the profits. And it's like, they love the idea, I think, of being able to, I came up with my award-winning idea. Now I'll just sort of enter it into the computer. The computer will spit out my, the process of my great idea. But it's like, but it's like the work, the actual work that goes into it is the quality, and it is the thing that you, for any like for any novel or movie or game or whatever it is, somebody was at some point in the absolute pit of despair working on this thing, thinking that it was never going to be any good. And probably losing sight of, what was going to happen at the end. And it's just that level of desire and work and craft of every level of it it's what's so important. And I mean, again, like, when you look at something like the making of Karateka, it's like AI could spit out a video game that looks like Karateka. But when you start asking questions of like, well, how did this get there? There are no answers. There's nothing but what's on the screen, right? But when you start digging into, you can't, when you start looking at the making of Karateka and when you realize just how much work and passion went into it, you understand where it came from. And again, AI can't create anything without basing it on all of that human work. As you say, it can show a simulacra of it, but it cannot generate it.
Yeah, let me talk about Barbie for a second here, though. I think that what's interesting about Barbie, because it's great that has worked its way into this conversation, because I thought that was an incredible film that should have an impossible movie that really mattered and resonated with a lot of people. But the stuff that I think you could kind of fault the movie for are the things where the movie looks like it's trying to appeal to a 4-quadrant audience, like studio-led ideas that have seeped into it. And you can kind of point that out. They sand it, like, and I'm not throwing shade at the Will Ferrell sort of Mattel, stuff in there, but it felt different and it felt a little less authentic and fun and risky than the rest of the incredible work in there. That authorship is so bloody important. Like, we want, even if we don't know the names, we want to know that that we're connected to the human condition, the human drive to build this art for us.
Yeah, well, and it's the act of creating something is part of it. It's not just the result. I mean, I think this is probably part of the reason that I've been so drawn lately to drawing with pen and ink on paper,
right?
Because I started as a hobby, just drawing from life in sketchbooks, and the goal wasn't to produce a good drawing. Like my journals in the beginning, I just did it because I enjoyed the act of drawing. And then I would turn the page in the sketchbook, and even if nobody ever looked at that page again, I had the experience of looking at this scene or whatever it was, drawing it. And that was like if I was in the zone, that was a good moment. So I think to look at a drawing, you're also looking at what the artist experienced when they were drawing it. And if there was no moment, there was no experience of drawing it that brought satisfaction or struggle or whatever it was to the person holding the pen, what's the interest of the drawing? It's not the same. It's drawing is not an end. It's also the act of doing it. I think of the traditional Japanese archery, where it's not about whether the arrow hits the target. It's about the perfection of the gesture of releasing the arrow. And if there's something wrong with that moment of release, like that's a separate thing from, is there, where in the target did the hole land? So
yeah. And you can machine a replication of emotion, but I don't know if you can machine emotion. I don't know if you can. And the other thing that I think is going to be true with a lot of AI created art, like, we already exist in this world of personalized entertainment and everybody's looking at everything through their own little portal. But if we're also the generators of exactly what we want to see through these AI tools, doesn't the idea of an audience completely just go away? I mean, it's just a billion audiences of one looking at their prefab, pseudo sequel to something that somebody already likes, as opposed to something inventive and brand new, generated from human passion and creativity.
Yeah.
God, it's a big topic.
I don't think that if anything, it's trying to inject some hopeful ideas into this dystopian reality that's just come crashing down on the three of us.
Yeah.
None of the traditional art forms have gone away, like with the invention of new technologies, analog, digital. People still pick up a guitar or a violin and play music in a room for other people who are sitting in the room listening to them. The fact that we can now record, a classical music performance with, amazing fidelity and transmit it around the world, and you can't hear the difference. Still, there's something about having somebody in the room with you playing the music for you, and you're hearing it at the same time as they're playing it. That's so precious that people will, stand in line and, pay money and, endure having to go to the bathroom, in order to experience this. So, so theater, puppetry, home cooked meals, all of these things, I think are going to be with us even after technological solutions have been found that produce results that in some objective way are just as good. We still want the original.
Beautifully said. You can add a 2D Metroidvania in 2024 to that list as well. Gentlemen,
Absolutely.
This has been a beautiful conversation. I'm so glad this came together. Thank you both for taking the time out of your busy schedules to meet with me and chat with me. Jordan Mechner and Chris Kohler are two of the best in the game industry that I've ever had the pleasure to work with and meet and enjoy their work. So thank you both, gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you dig the video, or review if you hear this on an audio podcast. Thank you. We will see you soon. And until then, play forever.